So good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight to learn about this really important topic. My name is Xinyi Lao. I'm the Director of Public Health Services here in the Newton Health and Human Services Department, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. So I'd like to present our panelists. We have Heather Taussig from the Newton Gun Violence Prevention Collaborative, and she'll be presenting for us. We have Megan Kennedy, Director of Social Services in the Newton Health and Human Services Department. She's here to answer questions. And we have Lieutenant Kevin Rudd from the Newton Police Department, who's also here to answer questions. So a few logistics for tonight's event. This session is being recorded and it will be posted online. If you have questions during the presentation, you're welcome to ask them. I'm going to hold all the questions until the end, however, for the panelists to answer. So again, feel free to answer your questions in the Q&A box. That's the little icon on the bottom of the screen that looks like two speech bubbles. You can enter them as you have them, but please understand that I won't be asking them formally until after the presentation is over. So without further ado, Heather, I'll let you take it away.
Okay, thank you so much, Xinyi. I'm going to share my screen so that I can start this presentation. And let's see it here. I'm sure this is okay. Great. There's a box right in the middle, but that's all right. So thank you again. My name is Heather Taussig. I am a longtime Newton resident. I want to thank my partners in this evening event, the Newton Police Department and the Department of Health and Human Services. I am a co-founder of the Newton Gun Violence Prevention Collaborative and also a longtime volunteer with Moms Demand Action. So Moms Demand Action is a grassroots movement. It has volunteer chapters in every state, and it's part of Everytown for Gun Safety, which is the largest gun violence prevention organization in the US with nearly 10 million members. So I'm going to speak tonight, have a little agenda right here, probably just a little less than a half an hour, give you a sense, an overview of the gun ownership rates in the US and in Massachusetts and in Newton, set the stage a little bit for talking about two programs that Moms Demand Action in Everytown have spearheaded, and they're educational programs that are geared around keeping our kids, families, and communities safe. As Xinyi mentioned, we're going to take some Q&A at the end, but I'll make sure to end on a couple local events coming up and sort of ways that you can get involved in this issue. So I'll start here, setting the stage a bit about gun ownership. You know, there's estimates that there are 200 to 350,000 guns in homes in the United States. But as you can see, importantly, is that there's a difference in the states in terms of the gun ownership rates. So the darkest states you see here, like Montana, Wyoming, and Alaska, these are states that have gun ownership rates in households upwards of 60%. The national average is about 30%. And you can also see from the light colored states that most of the New England states and Hawaii are much lower than the national average. They're looking more like 14, 15%. This, seem to move my slide forward. There we go. This rate parallels the concerning number of gun deaths we see in the country. So as you can see here as well, the darker states with higher gun death rates are those states that have high gun ownership rates, and also, which I'll talk about a little bit later, typically not as strict gun laws. So those Montana, Wyoming, Alaska you see as well, and those with lower gun death rates are typically those states in New England and Hawaii that have lower gun ownership rates and stricter gun laws. But there's clearly a concern, you know, as we see from this trend over the last 15 years, we've seen almost a doubling in the numbers of firearm suicides and homicides, which really make up the bulk of all gun deaths in the United States. And this trend is something that's continuing not just sort of across the country, but also what we see is a trend here in Newton. This is the last 15 years as well. And these are the numbers of active gun permits here in Newton. So this is a number that I was surprised to learn. A little over 2,500 active gun permits this year. But again, that number has more than doubled in the last 15 years. So although, stricter gun laws, we have a state of Massachusetts with stricter gun laws, which I'll speak a little bit more to, tragedies can still happen. And this is why, one of the most important things we're talking about tonight is an educational program to think about secure gun storage and to address the preventable gun injuries and gun deaths that happen when firearms are not stored safely and securely. So Be Smart is SMART is an acronym for a program that's designed to educate around secure gun storage. It's brought to you by Everytown for Gun Safety, and it's geared towards educating parents about the things that they can do to help keep their children safe. So I'll start with a few statistics. This is an alarming statistic for many to have learned recently that firearms are now the leading cause of death for children in the United States. That's surpassed just recently motor vehicle accidents. That statistic is alarming, but as are the numbers behind it. So, the nearly 2,100 children are killed by guns every year. That's an average of 6 children every day. If you add in the 18 and 19-year-olds, that number more than doubles. And a majority of those deaths for children are homicides, 60%. That's 1,200 children per year. And, a third of those are firearm suicide. That's 700 children per year. 100 children are unintentionally shot and killed. And we want to talk not only about the preventable part of that, but even also the 6,000 children that are injured every year. All of this obviously provides a huge amount of trauma to families and communities. And I want to share some more ideas of how that's preventable. A shocking 4.6 million children in the US live in a household with at least one loaded, unlocked firearm. What that's really saying is that the risk of having, an unlocked and an unloaded gun is really important to figure out when you're talking about secure gun storage. Almost all child unintentional shooting deaths occur in the home. I know that school shootings get a lot of attention. We used to say they were rare, but that's starting to feel like they're not as rare as they used to be. This number from the US Secret Service says that about 3/4 of school shooters obtained the gun that they used from their home or from a home of a relative or friend. And, over 80% of children and teens who died by suicide used a gun that they found in their own home or that of a family member. Yet another reason it's really important to think about how firearms are stored in your home. So, I think that we're all looking for common ground, whether you're a gun owner or a non-gun owner. We all want our kids to be happy and healthy. We have a responsibility to take care of our kids and protect our home, whether that's having a firearm in the house or not. But it's really important that if we can prevent even one gun death or injury, it's our responsibility to do so. So again, I'm going to run through the Be Smart program. There's actually a lot more information on this program. You can find it online at the besmartforkids.org website you see here at the bottom. This is a program that was endorsed by the American Academy of Pediatrics. This SMART acronym really figures into adult behaviors that people can take to keep their kids safe, because it's not the responsibility of children to not find guns. It's unsecured guns. It's actually the responsibility of parents to keep those kids safe. So we'll start with S, which is, really the most important point right here, which is a secure firearm. So most sort of research states that secure gun storage is associated with a decreased risk of firearm suicide and in unintentional shootings. And that's really important when you think about how a locked and unloaded and ammunition stored separately weapon is a very different situation than hiding a gun, right? Hiding a gun is not securing a gun. So I wanted to share a couple of examples of firearm storage options. These, contrary to popular belief, locking up your weapon does not necessarily prevent an owner from readily accessing their guns. Affordable options exist, and unsecured guns really do contribute to gun theft. We know that an estimated 380,000 guns are stolen from private gun owners every year. There's also, besides a gun case, there's also trigger locks and cable locks. And I know that the Newton Police Department shares typically these locks with new licensees and even with people at sort of a village day, a tabling event. I think that what we're trying to think about is how to normal a conversation around keeping our children safe and recognizing that a number of households in Newton and in other places where your kids go to play or for sleepovers or to visit family, could have firearms in the house, and how can we keep those safe? So the M in SMART is for modeling responsible behavior. You can't rely on curious kids not to find a gun. The majority of children are aware of where the firearm is in their house, and a third of them have actually reported handling that gun. I know that the research that we've seen is that a quarter of parents don't think their kid knows where their gun is. So it's really important to think about normalizing this conversation, not just if you have a weapon in your house, but also if your kids are, going to other people's houses that might have firearms. I wanted to share this slide because it was pretty surprising to me to look at the variety of weapons and, which ones are the real guns. Sometimes it's really hard to tell. Guns numbered 1, 2, and 6 here are actually the real firearms. They're made, a couple of them, as you can see, are made to look colorful like toys. Number 3 and 5 are actually the toy weapons. In 1988, there was a federal law that required that toy guns had to have this orange tip affixed to the barrel or an orange stripe. But sadly, what we've seen is that some of even the toy guns, people have tampered with them and taken off that orange tip. But even this gun number 4, you see on the bottom left, that was actually a real gun that was actually made to look like a toy. So it's confusing. And really what we're saying is that it's really important that you ask. The A in ask is so critical because 4.6 million children live in a home with a gun, and over half of gun owners don't securely store their firearms. So with over 2,500 gun licenses, active gun licenses here in Newton, we wanted to make sure to share this information that's normalizing how to ask if, for instance, your child is going over for a play date. And what we recognize is that it can be awkward at first. I know it was awkward the first time I asked somebody when my daughter went over to their house if they had a firearm and if they had it securely stored, because I think that it's not been a normal part of our conversation, but that's what we're trying to do, is sort of normalize that when you're asking about whether there's pets in the house or whether there's allergies or whether maybe somebody has a pool. This is a really important thing. And, one question can save a life. Okay. I think it's shocking a bit to me to have heard that last year's CDC survey of high school students found that 20% had seriously considered attempting suicide. I'm jumping actually, sorry, sorry, let me just go back. R in the SMART acronym is to recognize the role of firearms in suicide. And research shows that especially with teenagers, suicide can be an impulsive act in a moment of depression or intoxication or anger. Access to a firearm can mean the difference between life and death. And, the method of suicide matters. One important thing to note is that 70% of people that survive a suicide attempt don't go on to commit suicide. So again, as I was starting to say, a survey by the CDC showed that there was 20% of high school students had seriously considered attempting suicide last year. I think that's alarming for mental health professionals, for educators, but for families as well. And so this is really what we're trying to do, is share some statistics and share some things that we can all be doing better to help protect kids from unintentionally being injured by firearms. Lastly, of course, is the T for tell. And it's not just about, telling your friends what you've learned here, telling fellow caregivers or other parents, but also even grandparents, other places where your children might be spending their time. There are thousands actually of volunteers that are trained to share this Be Smart program with, school groups or religious organizations, other events and gatherings. So you're welcome to try to learn more about that. And again, besmartforkids.org is going to provide a lot more detail on these sort of options. I also wanted to make sure to show, a couple of the details. We talk a lot about Massachusetts having strict gun laws, which it does. This is the safe storage law. And, as you can see, one of the most important things here is that this is requiring gun owners in the state of Massachusetts to securely store their firearm when it's not in their direct control. Massachusetts was one of only 5 states that actually has a secure gun storage law in place. And we also have a child access prevention law, and this holds gun owners criminally accountable for letting their firearms be accessible to unauthorized minors. I know that some people on this webinar might have more questions about those laws in particular. I hope you might direct those to Lieutenant Rudd or others. We can certainly talk about that a little bit more. I want to turn though from our safe gun storage laws and talk a little bit about our red flag laws here in Massachusetts. Again, a state law. The red flag laws is the same as what's called an extreme risk protection order. And, I want to thank Everytown for Gun Safety again for creating this program. OneThingYouCanDo.org, where you can find more information. But it's really an initiative to help educate about the risks of suicide, firearm suicide, and know what's going on in your state so you can know what you can do. So, obviously we've all been through a lot with our families during this pandemic, but in general, as we know, we have a lot of mental health crises going on in our country. And, we see our kids go through bouts of sleeplessness or concerning behavior and talk. And I think that, what's most important to know is that loved ones should be paying attention, as most are, to how you see changes in behavior or language with your family members. And this just doesn't just apply to children. And I think that, as you see these things, you can obviously initiate a conversation. You can listen to what they're seeing and suggest somebody see a doctor as well. But really important, if you start to see some of these behaviors change and escalate, and you're worried about your loved one being in a situation where they might present themselves, harm to themselves or others, it's really important that you start to ask, does your loved one have access to a firearm? I think that, there's of course millions of responsible gun owners across the country, but when someone is in crisis, access to a firearm can really increase the risk of a tragedy. So 2 really important things to know about firearm suicide. The first is how tragically prevalent it is in the United States. Of all gun deaths in Massachusetts, 55% are suicides. That's an average of 140 per year. Of all the gun deaths, you can see these numbers actually by state and for the United States on a website, everystat.org. But, firearms also have an extremely high fatality rate in terms of suicide. They are uniquely lethal. It's assumed that if somebody is going to commit suicide, that they will figure out a way to do it. But access to a firearm actually makes a huge difference. As I think I mentioned, a vast majority of people who survive a suicide attempt don't go on to die by suicide. However, if somebody does attempt suicide with a firearm, it's much more lethal than any other means. So what can you do when someone's in crisis? An extreme risk protection order is an ability for a loved one or law enforcement to be able to intervene if you're worried about someone getting access to a gun and hurting themselves or others. Here are some of the general sort of thoughts behind, the general categories behind an extreme risk protection order. It's very important to know that it's designed to make a potentially dangerous situation safer. It's an emergency intervention. It's also temporary. It's not a permanent situation. It does respect due process. It does include a court hearing and a judge order, and it doesn't result in a criminal record. It's actually a civil order. But I think especially important is it doesn't rely on a mental health diagnosis. First off, the majority of people that have a mental health diagnosis don't pose a threat of violence. And secondly, most people who die by suicide with a gun or harm others don't have a diagnosed mental illness. So family is critical here. Family members are often the first to see warning signs, and they can intervene to help save a loved one's life or protect others. I just wanted to mention a few real life scenarios. One might be a husband who threatens to commit suicide when his wife presents him with divorce papers. You might have an adult son or daughter who tells their parent that they're concerned about things going on in their life and they're going to purchase a firearm. You might have someone who, in a domestic violence sort of situation, has sent a photograph of a gun to their domestic partner and threatened to kill them or themselves. Each situation is different, but extreme risk protection orders are a tool to protect the safety and rights of your loved one and potentially save their life. So if you know someone in crisis, it's really important that we always share this slide and talk about the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline and the crisis text line 988. I wanted to finish from talking about both these two educational programs and things you can know to talking a little bit about federal legislation and state legislation. Recent federal legislation supports these extreme risk protection laws in a couple different ways. So segueing into that, I think that many of you might have heard that in June of 2020, a bipartisan Safer Communities Act passed, and this provided billions of dollars in funding for a range of programs, including crisis intervention programs and mental health services. But as you can see, it also funds states with red flag laws and states without to implement extreme risk protection order laws. By potentially launching a state coordinator or public awareness campaigns or mandatory training programs for relevant government agencies. Even in Massachusetts, where we talk about having stricter gun laws already on the books, there's more to do, and there are many opportunities for advocacy and getting involved at the state level. There are gun sense legislative priorities that include a number of things that you see here on this screen. But I want to end by talking a bit locally about what we have going on this month of June. So June is Gun Violence Awareness Month. I want to thank Mayor Fuller for making her annual proclamation around National Gun Violence Awareness Day and Wear Orange Weekend. Wear Orange, you see, is where we honor survivors of gun violence, and we wear orange for a future free from gun violence. So you can find out about a number of events that are happening in neighboring communities. I know that Framingham and Boston, a number of other places are hosting more gatherings like you see here on the left. You can text the word orange to 64433, and that will give you kind of a map of things going on here this coming weekend. But I also wanted to mention, we've been working collaboratively, all of our partners here on this webinar, to have a gun buyback here in Newton on Saturday, June 24th in the morning. It's going to be at the old Aquinas College parking lot at 196 Jackson Road. And this is an opportunity to safely and anonymously turn in unwanted firearms. They might be firearms you found in your attic, or they might be, you might decide you have young kids and this isn't, you don't want to have this risk in your house anymore. There's a variety of reasons people bring their firearms, but no questions are asked. And we do an exchange for grocery gift cards ranging from $25 to $200. And we last did a buyback in 2019. We received 46 weapons and 2,500 rounds of ammunition. And we hope to have a really successful gun buyback as well, and appreciate all these partnerships that we have going on in Gun Violence Awareness Month. So with that, I think we're going to turn back to Q&A. And again, thank my partners for all the efforts that we have going on this month to keep our kids and communities safe. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Heather. That was a great presentation. We don't have any questions at the moment, but if anybody wants to, we're open to questions now. It can be directed at a particular panelist or just a general question. Feel free to use that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to put your thoughts out there. Okay, thank you. We have a comment, a very informative presentation. Here's a question. This is for probably Lieutenant Rudd or Sergeant Brandon. How many firearm murders have taken place in Newton over the last 5 years? Oh, Kevin, you're on mute.
The question was firearm murders?
Correct.
0. In 5 years. Yeah.
Thank you. Here's another question. This one's for you, Heather. What is done with the guns that are bought back?
Thank you. So it's actually a very interesting question. Without us, there's a simple answer, and that is that all the guns are destroyed. So we have partnered with the Middlesex Sheriff's Office, who really coordinates a number of gun buybacks in the county. These go on across the state, and actually in all states, really. All of our guns are destroyed. I remember actually at the 2019 gun buyback that there were a couple older guns that seemed a bit like relics. I don't know if I would say Civil War, but they had certainly for gun aficionados, people were like, wow, I can't believe we have to destroy this gun. But that's a commitment that we made when we initiate the gun buyback. So they are all destroyed. I know that then some other states, there's a program, and one that we've thought about and might, hope to bring in sort of in a future buyback. But there are a couple organizations that are trying to turn guns into garden tools. It's actually kind of a creative, interesting idea, because it might allow someone to feel like they're giving up their weapon, and then and that it's being turned into something productive and helping a community build out of something that might have been a tragedy or something like that. But for us, for now, that's our plan. I don't know if you guys at the police department would elaborate on any of that, or if you've been involved in the destruction of the weapons.
I'm not personally involved in the destruction of the weapons. When the ODOR support services area, depending on whether weapons are taken in on suspensions or things like that, there's a process that individuals have the right to get their firearms, turned over to an FFL so they can sell their firearms. We do have a process where residents will turn in unwanted firearms, and those will be processed by our support services and then brought over to the state police. I'm not exactly sure what the state police have done with those firearms after that.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is for Megan Kennedy. Are there any efforts being made on violence prevention for our children and teens?
I think when we look at prevention efforts, prevention is a broad term, right? So I think that there's kind of prevention in different domains. So we think about prevention in the schools, we think about prevention in the homes, we think about buffers, and we think about kind of what's being done to encourage children and teens to communicate without violence, right? So what does that look like? That looks like healthy communication. That looks like alternative tools when you're really feeling frustrated and stressed and sad or angry. We're allowing that to kind of to present itself in a different way than aggression or violence. And I think a lot of that is being done in the schools. It's also being done in different community events that we do. I think it's also, a lot of it too is where the child or children are living, right? If what are they what's modeling? If there's no, lack of violence there, then that is usually a good predictor. Is it 100% proof? No. But we do, I think, a nice job in the city of making sure that we're putting in social emotional learning lessons in the schools to decrease the behavior and aggression and finding alternatives. Does that help?
Okay, so next question is, how do our schools make sure the kids and staff don't bring the guns or other weapons in?
I can field that one. So I work the Community Services Bureau. So I work with all our youth officers. They're out of that bureau. I guess first and foremost, I mean, there's several state laws. I mean, nobody's allowed to bring a firearm inside a school unless they're a police officer. There's no wiggle room around. That doesn't matter if you're licensed or not. You may not bring a firearm into a school unless you are a sworn police officer or in law enforcement. We're fortunate to live and work in Newton. We don't have a school system where we need or feel the need to have metal detectors at the doors. The high schools have generally open campuses. So besides from having state laws and school policies prohibiting guns, knives, other weapons on campus, there's really no other, I guess, way to prevent it. If there's ever a suspected instance where a reported instance of a student with firearm or a knife of some kind, there's a full police response. Usually it's met with youth officers going, school staff will bring that student out of class, and under the supervision of police officers, school staff can search that student. But besides from that, again, like I said, we're fortunate to work in a community and live in a community and send our kids to school in a community where there's a very small percentage of instances where students are bringing firearms or weapons to schools.
Okay, thank you. Next question, great question. Will you be doing this presentation every year in June? I don't know, we hadn't planned it. This was our very first time doing this presentation, but I think we can certainly think about what that might look like. We definitely do. I don't actually know when the first year the Mayor Fuller did the declaration that Heather was mentioning, and we turn the fountain orange, and sometimes there's orange lights on City Hall and that type of thing, and various education and outreach events. But we certainly can consider that. The next question is sort of multi-part. They say that you mentioned licenses to possess machine guns, maybe around 11. So the questions are those licenses grandfathered in, and are automatic weapons outlawed in Massachusetts?
So yeah, they're not grandfathered in. They're still individuals that can apply for the machine gun licenses. There's certain specific requirements for those individuals. Not everybody can just access a machine gun license. And no, the fully automatic weapons are banned in Massachusetts.
Okay, next question. Does Newton have any program that addresses school bullying, as it has been shown that almost 100% of school shooters have been bullied?
I can take this one. I was a social worker in the schools prior to this role. There are bullying prevention, lessons that are taught in the elementary, middle, and high schools. And more often than not, there's whole class lessons on, again, I'm going to go back to social emotional learning. It's just something that Newton really takes seriously and does for all the schools. And in doing those lessons and delivering those lessons, and then also monitoring the classrooms where they were, are often looking for signs, any kind of complaint around bullying is taken very seriously. If students report that that's happening, it's not just the child that is the kind of target of the bullying, but also the person that's doing it as well. Interventions are often placed for both students when we're looking at behavior. But I do believe in district wide they do keep a good lookout, and there's also again kind of that social emotional learning ingrained in the curriculum.
Okay, next question. Have there been efforts to get pediatricians to ask about weapons in the home?
Well, I'll jump in and say that I know that a number of pediatricians are involved in Mass General so Mass General launched in 2019 a Center to Prevent Gun Violence. I don't think that's the exact right title, but it is specifically focused on physicians that are facing gun violence and what are ways that physicians can take to help sort of address that. I've heard a number of physicians speak that are part of the leadership team of that, and I know that pediatricians are part of that. So, I think we're very lucky to be living here in the metropolitan Boston area where there's a significant number of great hospitals. And my understanding is that more and more pediatricians are asking this. I have a 26-year-old daughter, and when she was young, that was definitely not a question. But my understanding now is that a number of my friends that have young kids, this is really being seen as a risk factor for injury in the home. And so a lot of pediatricians are asking those questions in families.
Okay, next question. Open campuses at high schools worry many parents. Newton South has 7 and Newton North has 3 open entrances throughout the day. So how do you prevent dangerous individuals entering through those open doors? And are there video cameras around those open entrances?
Excuse me. I can sympathize with that. I think many of us at the police department, including Chief Carmichael, don't love the open campus policy for safety reasons. We've met with people in the school department. It's something we're working on. We're working on doing it in the safest way possible. I know at Newton South, like students they have a code to get in the school. I mean, it's not a perfect system. I've been there where a FedEx delivery man has showed up and a student just opens the door for them. As for cameras, there are cameras throughout the schools. As youth officers and my bureau, we utilize them on a regular basis when there's incidents in the schools, students. So they're working, they're active. Obviously, that's something we can use after the fact in terms of preventing dangerous persons from getting in the schools for those open doors. We really don't, in all honesty, have a way to prevent that at this time. That's why we're working with the schools on trying to come up with a new policy on maybe Newton North only having 1 door, Newton South only having 1 door that's accessible. Before, as a police officer, I worked in one of the elementary schools. Obviously, elementary schools are far more secure, but the reality is if a student is walking by a door that's supposed to be locked and they see a student that they recognize and that person's trying to get in the building, they're going to let that student in. So I say the most important thing to do is us as, police officers or city officials or parents is to educate, our children and our students on, not to let people in the building who shouldn't be there. If they see someone who shouldn't be there, tell an adult or tell somebody who can get that person out. And also our high schools have dedicated youth officers. Officer John Panic assigned to Newton North and Officer Matt Clell assigned to Newton South, and they spend the majority of their workday Monday through Friday at their high school. So there is a police officer there almost all the time.
Do the schools do any active shooter drills similar to Alice trainings or anything like that?
So in Newton, we do, we don't call them active shooter drills. We call them hostile event drills. All schools do them a little differently, but all schools do participate in some. In the high schools, it's a little more in depth because the high school students can handle it. At the elementary school level, they do the evacuations, but they don't do as much as like huddling in the corner because they're not trying to startle the students. But they are doing it. That's Toby Romer, the assistant superintendent, takes it very seriously, and he does a really good job making sure the schools get that done every year.
If I can jump in, I think one thing I'd add is that I was just out at a listening tour. So Massachusetts is considering a suite of gun violence prevention bills, and they've tasked the chair of the Judicial Committee, Michael Day, to do a listening tour around the state. And he spoke at Framingham State a few weeks back, and the topic was school shootings. And one of the things that got brought up were the active drills. And there's a variety of different drills, as mentioned here, Alice drills and others. One of the laws that is being considered at the state level has to do with drills in schools, and it's to actually fund studying the impact on children from drills. So, I think it's, I've heard from a lot of parents, there's a lot of concern about the trauma that their kids face when having a drill, because they're really imagining that it's real or they think it's real. And so they're, at least I'm heartened to know that there's a bill out there to look at that. We actually need to have some research and find out what drills that are in our schools are doing the best good and the least harm to our students. That's what I would add.
Okay, could either Lieutenant Rudd or Sergeant Brandon speak to the use of metal detectors in schools?
It really hasn't been something that's been brought up. I mean, I'm part of the safety team that I meet with, that we get together once a month. It's not really something we've discussed. I think more of our concern at the police department has been, the open campus policy, but metal detectors is just not something that the Newton community wants. I mean, we're a safe community, and I don't think that would go over very well with the majority of the Newton community. So it's really not something that we're looking into at this time.
I'd also add that I spoke a few times in the public comment part of our Newton School Committee meetings. And one, I'm not sure, frankly, if it was January or February, I think, but Assistant Superintendent Toby Romer, who's in charge of school safety, presented the Newton School Safety Plan at that, and you can see the recording of that. And I think it was really helpful. I think that you saw that there were a lot of questions that school committee members had for him and his team. But I think for any, people on this webinar that are interested to sort of know a little bit more about that, that's one way you can find that, is you can see the recording of the school committee meeting about this.
Okay, last chance for any questions from attendees. All right, do any of the panelists have any final thoughts before we end the webinar?
The only thing I want to say again is, thank you very much to our partners here in the city. I'm really pleased that that we have, taken June and Gun Violence Awareness Month as an opportunity to do a real sort of comprehensive sweep of the city, with messaging going out in the social media of the police department, the social media of Health and Human Services, the social media of the schools. I know our superintendent newsletter has had information on it, and we've really seen also a lot of community support and engagement for the gun buyback that happens at the end of the month. So, again, I'm happy to field questions for those sort of residents of Newton that would like to get more involved and understand more around gun violence prevention, both in Newton and at the state and federal level. Please reach out. But, thank you again for all being here tonight and all the work that you do to keep our kids and families safe.
Okay, thank you. We did have a couple questions come in. So the first one is, this person mentions that they were at the listening tour in Framingham last week, and one of the interests from the audience was to have more guidance counselors in the schools. And they're just wondering if this is ever part of the discussions for Newton.
I can take it and answer the best I can kind of talk to the work that we do between city side and school side, and the amount of mental health supports that the Newton community has, and that we're always looking at the amount of guidance counselors, and not only the amount of guidance and social workers, but really the roles in the schools that they have, right? So what can they do during the day? And then what are the partners in the community doing to bridge, not just having everyone in the schools be responsible for the mental health of our young people, but really having it as a community effort, and taking some of that on, from Riverside, Community Care is our mental health, one of our mental health partners, and obviously a social worker from the Department of Health and Human Services, looking at advocates, all the different partners in our work. I think we are kind of always going back and forth and having discussions with the schools on how we can bolster the existing supports and find out what is missing and what is needed to do that.
Okay, and one additional question, this person wondering what the status is with the gun store on Rumford Ave.
do you guys want to speak to that? I can speak a little bit to it, but
I mean, yeah, you can speak to it. So it wasn't Rumford Ave, it was Washington Street. And if you want to talk about it, go for it.
yeah, I mean, so as I said, I was the co-founder of a Newton Gun Violence Prevention Collaborative, and really that started, frankly, as an initiative to stop a gun store from opening in Newton. A few of us that had been longtime volunteers with Moms Demand Action it was brought to our attention that somebody was intending to try and open a gun store on Washington Street, which was very close to Cabot School and Newton North High School. And it was also brought to sort of a number of people's attention that we didn't have any zoning in place around gun stores, around what we would consider if a gun store was to open in Newton, where should it be located? Should it be, a certain distance from schools or mental health services or places where children gather, like Cabot's Ice Cream? 2,000 people signed a petition to have the city take up some zoning around gun stores. And so some zoning was passed quite quickly and I believe unanimously to put in place zoning that limited a gun store from opening in Newton to really sort of very small percentages of areas that really would meet those requirements. So the gun store on Washington Street did not open, did not move forward. And I think that what you really saw was a pretty motivated group of Newton residents saying that this wasn't something that we wanted here. And, I think personally, I was very worried. I had heard about a gun store in Arlington that had a number of break-ins and guns stolen from there. So, again, I think we're working to keep Newton safe. And this didn't feel like something that would help move that agenda forward. So that's the status as I understand it right now.
Not sure I fully understand this question, but the question is, has mental health support been added to response to emergency police calls?
I don't know if Megan, if you want to speak more to that,
Sure.
you're probably more of an expert, but the fact is that we do have a clinician that works here with the department and does respond.
Just what you said. There is someone that is with the police, Eric Nahan, and she works closely with patrol and does go out for kind of the calls to help people in crisis and talk with them about what they're experiencing and making sure that they're getting the support they needed, and she does follow up as well. So there is someone with the Newton Police Department. It is a common practice in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. There are lots of jail diversion clinicians and co-response models out there, and Newton has adopted one of those.
Okay, well, thank you everyone so much for attending. Big thank you to our panelists. It was, I think, a great presentation. A lot of good questions, a lot of good expertise, and we can definitely consider doing this program again next June. I think we'll keep an eye out on our website, and I believe Heather's on yours as well to post the recording. If for anybody who wants to rewatch it, for anybody who wasn't able to attend. Otherwise, I hope everyone has a wonderful evening and enjoys the gorgeous weather outside.
And New TV will record it, put it up as well.
Oh, perfect. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.